Are we powerless to tackle bankers, or is it time to rip it up and start again? Rise up! Stacey? And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the global banks. They're dead. They're corpses. No amount of aerosol trying to make the stink go away is going to change this.
We have to go through this every quarter when they say, oh, we just found another trillion in debt, more austerity measures, more bonuses, more salaries. When are we going to get smart and wake up and figure out that these guys all need to be fired? Try.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. The destroyer of worlds.
Specifically, the committee decided to purchase additional agency mortgage-backed securities, or MBS, at a pace of $40 billion per month.
The destroyer of worlds.
And if we do not see substantial improvement in the outlook for the labor market, we will continue the MBS purchase program, undertake additional asset purchases, and employ our policy tools as appropriate until we do.
The crisis arrived because the illusion that wealth and prosperity would last forever has ended. Since it was based on debt and a pretense that debt can be papered over by an out-of-control fiat monetary system, it was doomed to fail.
Well, in order for all of these banks to make all of the bets they make, they have to have something behind it. Not a lot relative to the size of the bets they make and the derivatives positions they take, but certainly something. And that something is our money.
We have a global financial system where just a 0.4% move could take down the whole house of cards.
That we're told is virtually bankrupt, our country. That we have to charge our children £9,000 a year to go to university. That we're laying off hundreds of thousands of people in the public sector because we can't pay their bills. We're told over and over again by the same government that is spending £40,000 a night on hotels for pilots. £40,000 a night for hotels for pilots to bomb someone else's country when our pensioners in the winter time are going shivering below.
To financial institutions in Europe and other countries.
Which ones?
I don't know.
$500 billion and you don't know who got the money?
The loans go to the central banks, and they then put them out to their institutions to try to bring down short-term interest rates and dollar market.
This is no dream. This is really happening.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your patience in queuing for this meeting. My apologies for that. The House authorities are evidently anxious about the number of people who have turned up tonight. We had no idea there were this many people interested in economics, and it's very, very heartening that so many of you are. Now, I'm normally, if I say so myself, the main speaker at public meetings, but now, this evening, I'm not even the warm-up act, because the main speaker needs no warm-up act at all.
I understand the point of view which suggests that somehow London is a very lightly regulated market, and that's why all this fraud and these misdemeanors take place here.
Because that's the reality of the situation. Okay, stop peddling that lie.
Okay,
stop peddling that lie.
Max,
We have total deregulation in London. There's no regulation. We can rehypothecate to infinity in London. Stop telling lies.
Max Keiser, I'll give you your say.
He is the most watched television presenter in the world, and that's quite a big thing to say. But as he's working for Chinese TV, Russian TV, Press TV, and God knows how many other TVs, it's little wonder. And the reason that he is because he's in such demand, not only because he's extremely good as a TV presenter, but because he knows more about economics than the people who are running the economy. But Max Keiser believes that the trouble's going to get much, much worse, and that it will not be confined to these islands, not be confined to this continent, but will be a at least bicontinental phenomenon, and that Britain, unfortunately placed in the middle of both, between both these continents, metaphorically speaking, politically and economically speaking, will suffer more than most. Please welcome the legend that is Max Keiser.
Thank you so much for coming out. How's it sound? Pretty good? You can hear in the back? Yeah. All right, great. Well, it's great to be in this particular venue. I must admit, when I walked in, I couldn't help but think of that movie V for Vendetta. In case you missed it, it's quite an exhilarating film that stars Parliament in a most spectacular way toward the finish of that film. Of course, when I was coming up the staircase to come into the room, I heard a couple of comments. Of course, the same comment. I heard it 2, 3 times. Where's Stacy? Stacy is there. Over there she is. Yeah, okay. And politicians don't serve the public anymore. It's just something on the way to serve their banking masters. And we're seeing it here in the UK. Tony Blair being a prime example of that. We see it in the US as well with Bill Clinton and others. But I wanted to divide my talk this evening into basically 2 parts. And I thought I would try to piece together for you something interesting, taking a look at some of the political themes that are dominant here in Parliament, here in the UK. We know that there's a lot of brinkmanship going on right now between the UK and Germany. So we have Cameron is trying to work out a deal on the EU, and he's getting some pushback from Germany. And this has been going on for some time. There's a couple of high-level meetings coming up in the near future. So the question is, who is going to win this battle between Germany and the UK? Although it's not really presented as such, it's more of the EU versus the UK, whether the UK wants to be in the EU and what are the benefits and what are the costs, etc. But it's really between Germany and the UK. It's clear that in Frankfurt there's a possibility now of them achieving some banking supremacy in Europe. And Cameron says he won't join this banking union. He wants to protect the City of London and keep its position as the top bank center in the world. Oops. Let's see. They just got downgraded. The City of London is now number 2. Number 1 is New York City. Hong Kong is hot on their heels, and I think Frankfurt, of course, wants a big piece of that business. David Cameron, in his recent speech at the Lord Mayor's banquet, he's defending the city. He's promoting the city. Now, what David Cameron can't seem to see is how the rest of the world sees the City of London. What David Cameron fails to see is that the City of London is the laxest regulatory environment in the world. The AIG scandal, at the heart of the 2008 collapse, the Lehman Brothers collapse, the Bernie Madoff scandal, all had huge components, primary components, right here in the City of London. This is what David Cameron wants to protect. The LIBOR scandal, $300 trillion scandal. News coming about this on a daily basis. How traders in London gaming the system for ill-gotten gains, disrupting the system, causing huge financial dislocation. This is all through London. HSBC implicated in huge multi-hundred billion pound money laundering scandals involving Mexican drug cartels. This is what David Cameron wants to defend. Barclays Bank, involved in hundreds of billions of dollars worth of money laundering, market manipulation, drug cartel money, the energy market rigging, the price protection insurance mis-selling. The list goes on and on. Paul Moore, top regulator, former top regulator of HBOS in London. I had him on my show. He agreed that
he made the point that over 100 million have been thrust back into poverty because of this financial scandal that has its nexus in the city of London. And we decided, and Paul agreed, this is nothing less than a financial holocaust. Millions are dying. Millions are set to die. People are committing suicide. All for the sake of some banker bonuses to protect what David Cameron considers to be the jewel of the UK economy. Fraud, larceny, manipulation, market rigging, scandals, and not to mention his re-election coffers that put him in office. This goes all the way up to the Bank of England, caught in the LIBOR rigging scandal, is now caught in a collusion with the Treasury in trying to hide a $48 billion black hole of debt that's part of a $37 billion stolen from Osborne, from pensioners and insurers, as part of this coupon stealing, a smash and grab that you've been reading about, where Osborne just stole $37 billion from Treasury, claiming, oh, it's nothing. It's just an accounting error. It's just an accounting gimmick. We're going to use that to pay for what we wanted to pay for. Even though that money is due eventually, it's not unlike any other type of market manipulation where cash is taken in the present and the liabilities are left for a future day. And who pays for the liabilities in the future day? Well, look what's happening in Greece. Look what's happening all over Europe. Look what's happening all over the world. The austerity that's being imposed to bail out scamsters like Osborne and his scams. I was recently on a news program at the BBC, Daily Politics, and everyone agreed that, yes, the country is remarkably financially illiterate. So I put it to Andrew Neil. I said, well, if everyone agrees that the country is financially illiterate, why is George Osborne pushing a program to exchange workers' rights for shares in those companies? Isn't that exploitive? You just said the country doesn't know anything about stocks and shares, economics and finance. So you're going to have them give up their rights as workers in exchange for something that you admittedly say they have no knowledge about whatsoever? That's outrageous. And I haven't been back on that show. Now getting back to Germany and this fight that's going on between Germany and Britain, because of course one is they're vying for domination in the financial sphere, but of course Germany is over in the Eurozone, and the Eurozone has many problems. The peripheral countries are collapsing, as we all are aware of. And there's, of course, a daily strife in terms of whether or not these countries are going to be able to sustain themselves. But then again, the UK is the most indebted of the G20 nations. If you add the public-private debt to the bank debt, the UK has 700% of its GDP in debt. Iceland, before Iceland collapsed, was just under 1,000%. So this country is in remarkably indebted bad shape. The bank stocks, the banking sector is still 500% debt to GDP, on top of the public debt, on top of the private debt. The employment, mostly part-time and temporary. The government comes out and says, well, the employment numbers are not that bad. Well, it's all part-time and temporary employment, people who are underemployed. The employment picture is not healthy at all. And ultimately, as I've expressed many times, this is a battle in this country and other countries between savers versus speculators. The savers, the people who put money in pensions, the insurance industry, with interest rates near 0%, one of the biggest losers is the insurance industry that can no longer viably sustain itself as an enterprise or a model that relies on interest rates to be 4 or 5%, a normalized interest rate environment to affect their model of paying out claims versus money that they have in the bank earning a static rate of return. But because the Bank of England and other banks are forcing that rate down to zero, the insurance industry is now under threat. So how can you have capitalism without insurance? How can you have capitalism without capital? How can you have capitalism without savings? You can't have capitalism without capital. You can't have capital without savings. You can't have savings without a higher interest rate to attract savings. So you don't have capitalism here. You don't have capitalism in the United States. You don't have capital in the G20 countries. It's not capitalism. It's a kleptocracy. Not for nothing that people wear those masks around the world, the hero of that film, because people are ready for this global insurrection against banker occupation. And we see it all over the world. But this has many threads to the story, and I want to focus on one that I find particularly interesting, talking about Germany and England. Because we have just heard in the last 2 weeks, a remarkable blockbuster story came out in the news. It did not get a lot of attention, but I think that it deserved. October 22nd was a bombshell of news, and I'm going to get there by taking you through a bit of history. And it all started back in the 1999 to 2002 period. So for market historians out there, does that ring a bell? Okay, Gordon Brown was the chancellor. And we have a period very famous around the world known as Brown's Bottom. Brown's Bottom, 1999 to 2002. Gordon Brown sold 60% of Britain's gold, nearly 400 tons, at a 20-year low price between $256 and $296 an ounce, leaving, that's about a 10 billion pound difference between where the price is now. And he didn't just sell the gold. He panic sold the gold, or to use the parlance of the day, he bottled it. Gold was sold at 10% below that day's fix in the London fix. They telegraphed these sales and did them over 17 distinct auctions, which is something you never want to do, to telegraph your motives to the market. So traders around the world front-run those trades. They got in front of those trades. They sold gold ahead of Gordon Brown, and they made tons of money basically making Gordon Brown a dupe and selling at that 2-decade low price. And it was shambolic. And the press at the time, to give you an idea of what people were saying about this at the time, it's no secret that this was one of the worst tragedies in Britain's financial history. Quote, "The timing of the decision was ludicrous. We told them we're going to push the gold price down before you sell," said Peter Fava, the head of precious metals at HSBC, who was present at these meetings. "We thought it was a disastrous decision. We couldn't understand it. We brought up a lot of potential problems at the meeting." Alan Greenspan of the U.S. Federal Reserve and the world's most respected bank governor at that time said in response to Brown's decision, "Gold still represents the ultimate form of payment in the world." David Cameron says he wants to put this economy on a war footing. What about this crime? Selling 60% of the nation's gold at rock bottom prices. But was it just stupidity? Was it just an act of a charlatan, of a moron? The story gets, the plot thickens. We have several theories about why Gordon Brown panic sold gold at the bottom. The reason given, and I spoke to Philip Hammond, who was the Shadow Treasury Secretary during a film we were making. He said at that time that there was an idea pushed by Blair that the country wanted to support the euro, which was being introduced at that time. They were selling a lot of gold to go out there and buy euros, and they wanted to be good European neighbors. That was kind of the prevailing thought. Flash forward to theory number 2, which has been revealed within the last year. The story emerged that the bank sold the gold to bail out a New York City bank. A bullion bank was short 2 tons of gold, and the price was moving up, threatening a global bank crisis. So again, before AIG, before Anglo-American Bank, before Lehman, before RBS, one of these situations where a bank in New York is short and needs to be bailed out. The panic sales were needed to manipulate the price down to let the unnamed bank off the hook and out of their short sales. So this sounds awfully tyrannical. Gordon Brown selling 60% of the world of Britain's gold to bail out a New York bank. 2004, AIG, possibly the bank that was needing to be bailed out, drops out of being a market maker on the LBMA, the London Bullion Market Association. In 2004, Rothschild, another possible bank that was needed to be bailed out, withdrew from trading gold. Okay, this brings us now to theory number 3 in the present time, and really a most outrageous development that I would like to, this building needs to know what's going on here. I told you I made that film with Philip Hammond, who was in the film in 2008. It was called Brown's Bottom, and we were talking about Germany and gold and the value of gold. And I'll give you a timeline of what we were doing when we were making that film, Brown's Bottom. It was Thursday, March 13 of 2008, when gold broke above $1,000 an ounce. Friday, March 14th, Bear Stearns collapsed. And by the way, JP Morgan bought them out for $2 a share and inherited a multi-billion ounce silver short naked position, which we can talk about later.
Sunday, March 16th, 2008, the Fed in America slashes interest rates by 75 basis points. Okay, that Monday, March 17th, Stacy Herbert and myself, making this film, were at the Bundesbank. We were at the Bundesbank in Berlin, in Frankfurt, thank you. And we were making this film about why gold is important. And in the interview and in the melee, and the Bundesbank was in panic, it let slip from one of their attachés, the public relations person, when I asked, let's see the gold, we were told the gold is not here. We pressed on this point, asking where the gold was. Our film came out a few months later, and this set off a wide curiosity in Germany about their gold and why wasn't it at the Bundesbank. It turns out that 60% of their gold is actually held outside of the country. And the country of Germany was very upset about this, and there's been, for 4 years now, there's been a growing grassroots effort to make some accounting of that gold. This has been growing. They then admitted that 60% of their gold was outside of the country, mostly at the New York Fed. And then, here's the bombshell. October 22nd of this year, the German Federal Accountability Office ruled that the Bundesbank must conduct an audit on German central bank gold holdings as part of a repatriation from New York, who will ship 150 tons, that's 50 tons a year for 3 years. The statement from Germany included a previously classified report that reveals that the Bundesbank withdrew nearly 1,000 tons of gold from the Bank of England in 2000 and 2001, decreasing Germany's gold holding in London from 1,400 tons to 500 tons. So now we know that Germany's call on gold in 2001 prompted Gordon Brown to sell this country's gold 400 tons because this country didn't have their gold to deliver. This country, when they went down to get the gold to deliver to Germany, it wasn't there. And this is a problem with central banks around the world. They've been leasing out the gold, lending out the gold, selling all their gold, and this country has had its sovereignty disturbingly impinged by the sale of 60% of the only asset that's worth anything in a crisis, as Greenspan said. Now flash forward to today. You've got the UK with 300 tons of gold, Germany with 3,600 tons of gold, and Cameron's going over there whinging on about protecting the city of London. Does he mention his gold was Gordon Brown gave away the sovereignty of the country to Germany? Is there any plan to increase the gold stocks in this country? Some people, of course, would discuss whether or not gold is going to be a key issue going forward. And I want to go into the second part of what my talk here, and then we'll open it up. But this is the second part, and this gets into the heading of really the title of our talk here today about currency collapse. And to understand why gold is important, and understand the coming currency collapse, and to understand why Britain is particularly vulnerable holding a pair of twos in a poker game where Germany's holding 3 aces, you need to understand, again, some history. Part of the history you have to understand is the history of bubbles. A history of bubbles, and I'll give you some highlights from the history of bubbles. Would you like to hear some highlights from the history of bubbles? Yes! Are you there? Are you with me? Are you there? All right, famous bubble, of course, tulip bulb. Bubble in 1634. Tulip bulbs went from 1 to 60 and back to 0. 1 tulip bulb would equal 12 acres of land. This is what happens. People get psychotic. They go into manias. There's a great book called The History of Manias that talks about this. The Mississippi Company from 1720. You had the stock in that company. This is part of John Law, famous financier, created a Ponzi scheme backed by the currency of the country. The stock in that company went from 500 to 18,000 to 0. The NASDAQ in America, 1981 to 2000. It started off at around 1,000, blew up during the dot-com bubble to 5,000, crashed. Now, these are bubbles that are caused primarily by greed is a factor that drives these bubbles. Another major bubble is caused by fear. A good example would be gold from 1970 to 1982 during the oil embargo, the Mideast unrest, political unrest, the Nixon impeachment, social unrest. People were driven into gold out of fear. Price went from 35 to 800, a 2,400% gain. It then went down to a price known in infamy as Brown's bottom. So let's talk about today. I want to describe a market to you, and you tell me if it sounds like a bubble. It starts in 1982. It's hitting in America a 240-year high. In Britain, it's hitting a 300-year high. The government is the primary buyer in this market. Since 2000, the U.S. has increased the supply of this market from 15 trillion to 45 trillion. It's an increase of 300%. In each one of those years, the market has hit a new 240-year high. Since 2007, the year the current crisis began, the 6 biggest governments in the world have been increasing the supply between 83 and 362% in this market, and the price continues to hit multi-hundred-year highs. What is this market class? The bond market, the sovereign bond market, the gilt market here in the UK.
Yesterday, the British government borrowed money from international investors at record low levels, saving taxpayers millions of pounds. Does he agree with me that it's more evidence our economic plans are working?
My honourable friend makes a good point, which is because of the fact we have a credible plan to get on top of debt, to get on top of deficit, to show how we'll pay our way in the world, we have record low interest rates which were described by the Shadow Chancellor as the key.
And this is a bubble of fear. People have been piling into bonds out of fear, and they've been driving the prices to levels not unlike tulip bulbs, the South Sea bubble, and any other historic, manic, crazy bubble in the past. So what is the smart money doing in the face of this bubble? Well, what are the central banks doing for the first time in 30 years since 2009? They're buying gold. So let's look at the price of gold, because people say, oh, that's in a bubble. Well, during the 5 years when the supply of the government bonds increased by hundreds of percentage points around the world, by 25 trillion in the U.S., and substantially more around the world, the price of the supply of gold has moved up 8%. You can print bonds, you can print money, you can't print gold. So far in 2012, the global central banks have bought 273 tons of gold, with that number exceeded to be double by the end of the year. You know, a lot of people say that there's my show. They bring up this phrase propaganda. And I say, yes, there is propaganda. It's max propaganda. These countries are buying gold. Why do you think they're buying gold? There's an axis of max. And these countries are buying gold. Russia increasing their gold every single month. India buying gold. Of course, the UK, no gold. But the biggest player in all this, of course, is China, because they've got $3 trillion in reserves, over $1 trillion in US dollars. In 2003, they had 600 tons of gold. In 2009, they had 1,000 tons of gold. And we know, and I can tell you, that around the world, the Chinese government, through Hong Kong, have been importing hundreds and hundreds of tons of gold. The announcement will come very shortly that China has gone from 1,000 tons of gold to possibly over 3,000 tons of gold, possibly more than Germany, making them the #2 gold reserve in the world. And they're doing this because they know that the debt bubble that has been built around the world for the past 30 years is about to pop, and it's about to pop in epic proportions. They're buying gold because they don't trust each other. You've got all the major currencies engaged in a currency war where they're all trying to devalue their currencies simultaneously. We've had 260 stimulus programs by banks around the world so far in 2012, including QE3 in the U.S. So, I come to my predictions. It's becoming clear that all these governments are in the same boat. They're all printing at the same time. The bonds are at unbelievably high bubble-like levels. and we're going to see a crash in sovereign debt market, and by crash I mean values crashing 75% or more from their current levels. Those who own a portfolio of bonds should be aware that they are tap dancing on the edge of a cliff. Gold prices are, and silver, of course, have been, the bull market hasn't even started based on the coming tsunami of debt collapse that's in the works. So that is my presentation. The UK is the heart of fraud around the world. If there's nothing to protect here, unless you want to have a complete culture of fraud. And this is, again, why we have relocated our show from Paris to London, because we want a front row seat on the collapse. We want to bring it to you from the trenches, in real time, so we can all, watch this as it unfolds on our show, Keiser Report, because the next 18 months are going to be, in my opinion, a spectacular collapse here and in the world, but particularly here because this country, thanks to Gordon Brown, basically gave away its sovereignty back in the year 1999 to 2002. It's an error that will live forever as the day Britain lost its sovereignty. Thank you.
Wow. Follow that. I think I'm probably speaking for most people in here when I say we don't have any bonds. We don't have any stocks. And the only gold we've got is in our wedding rings or a few bits of jewelry in the wife's jewelry box. We don't even have much cash. So why should we care? Why should we care about this coming collapse? Will it affect us, and how will it affect us?
Well, George, the most immediate experience people have with the bond market, I would say, would be with their pension accounts. And the pension accounts are being raided. The pension accounts who need a certain amount of minimum interest payments to be viable for the life of the pension is being destroyed with a program called quantitative easing. And the program forces interest down to near 0% as a way to make it cheaper for banks to borrow to speculate. So the pensioners are getting their money stolen. People in this country, if you have a parent, you know that their income is down sharply on their pension accounts. That puts pressure on you to make up for that income. Secondly, as I mentioned earlier, the insurance industry. The insurance industry is extremely vulnerable to 0% interest rates. Thirdly, 0% interest rates force companies to hedge their exposure to the inflation that comes when you drive interest rates lower and you flood the markets with cash, and that drives energy prices higher and food prices higher. So you're paying for it at the pump. You're paying for it when the price of food goes up. The education prices are going up. There's real inflation in this country. It's not the official government-related number of whatever it might be on a daily basis in the 2% or so. If you include these off-balance sheet items, it's 7, 8, 9%. Who's paying for that inflation? You are. And why is that inflation occurring? Because of 0% interest rates to satisfy the bond market, to satisfy the bond speculators. So it's not about owning bond stocks or gold. It's about being victimized by a system that has destroyed labor, destroyed wages, destroyed the basic stuff of a sustainable economy and replaced it with a financialized economy. And that's been growing for 30 years, thanks, of course, to the Thatcher-Reagan revolution. And it's been growing for 30 years. So you have now a situation where over 10% of the economy here in Britain officially is the financial sector. But if you take in the contingent liabilities in housing and insurance, it's a much higher number. That's very unhealthy. It's a parasite. It's like having a tapeworm that suddenly takes over your body and destroys you. It's a financial cancer. The solution using monetary theory is to raise interest rates. But the politicians will say, well, that'll kill the housing market. That'll kill the economy. Yeah, it will for about a year or two. but then you can grow again in a sustainable way. But this way you have what's now called zombie companies. It was just reported that 10% of all companies, 160,000 companies in this country, are zombie companies. They can't make enough money to pay down their debt. They can only make enough money to pay the interest on the debt. They're the walking dead. They're zombies. And that's this economy is at a permanent stagnation, point of stagnation, because of these issues that we're talking about. So the bond market is the backbone of the economy, and the fact that it's being destroyed in the way that it's being destroyed, you pay for it in those 5 or 6 ways that I just iterated.
Who wants to ask the second question? Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for your speech. I find it a little bit difficult to understand why the level of gold in Britain is so low. I mean, bearing in mind that Britain was an empire and colonized quite a lot of countries, including, say, the Gold Coast. I mean, why do you think the level of gold is this low?
The level of gold, closer to 700 tons before Gordon Brown got to it, was not a horrible position to be in. It put Britain at least in the top 10 or so of gold owners in the world. Russia has about 1,000 tons. China has over 1,000, so having 700 tons is not the worst position to be in. But since the sale of the gold, these other countries, particularly in the last 5 years, have been aggressively adding to their gold because they realize that there is a paper apocalypse coming, and you don't want to go to a gunfight with a knife. You don't want to go to the bargaining table without any gold. So Britain has this incredibly low concentration of gold, and they should have been buying gold. It's similar to Britain had the North Sea oil, which was a great GDP booster for years. Are they like Norway, where they put the profits into a sovereign wealth fund so that they protect the citizens for decades and generations? No, they squandered it in something called the housing bubble. So now the North Sea oil is running down, and there's no money there either. The stewards economically of the country have done a very, very poor job.
Thank you.
Yes, gentleman in the beard. Yeah, no, yes, you, sir. In the middle there, right in the middle, right in front of me, yes.
Are you telling us that we can't trust the British government? For 800 years we've been telling you that.
Go on. No, I was going to say, let's take 2 or 3.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of people. Yes, the gentleman next to him.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Keiser and Mr. Galloway. Thank you for this. I'm a local government employee. What should I do? And what should I do about my pension contributions? So is there any point in me making monthly payments? Now, of course, I'm not asking, you can't give me financial advice, I understand that, but generally.
Well, the first step is, I think, for everyone in the room to maybe have a little adjustment in their thinking. Because in this country and in most countries, the media is not doing a very good job. You end up seeing a very narrow perspective of what's making the economy work and what people are doing. So if nothing else, I would hope you leave here tonight and start asking yourself some serious questions about what's really going on in this economy, and then from there bring it down to your personal situation. There are some risks that I don't think are being adequately just talked about for folks in this economy and in other economies. And there are things that you might want to consider to protect yourself or to take a more active role. Here's a couple of things that I think are brilliant in response to these problems. First of all, I applaud UK Uncut, which is an activist group in the UK. They have done a remarkable job in putting pressure on companies to pay taxes and to comply with the law. There's another a campaign out called the Rolling Jubilee, which is allowing individuals to put up small sums of money to retire debt completely off the books. This is an outgrowth of the Occupy Wall Street movement. There's also a lot of, when David Cameron talks about the aspiration nation, what I hear is the asphyxiation nation. But on the grassroots level, there are some interesting things happening in this economy. One I'm particularly fond of is this whole movement of crowdfunding, which is it's a grassroots type of approach where people are putting up very small amounts of money, £5, £10, and they're financing projects and companies and things going forward completely outside of the government. So getting back to the gentleman's question about, the government is corrupt. Yes, we accept that. There is now the ability for the population using social networking tools, internet tools, and other tools to do an end run around the government and to do a lot of very creative things that are emerging, that are a way to make the situation better. Having said that, I cannot obviously give you an individual profile. I apologize if I'm speaking in somewhat vague terms, but since I don't know your situation, it would be irresponsible to make some kind of recommendation, as you can understand.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Gentleman in the yellow.
Well, I'm just wondering there's a lot of sort of scaremongering, but is there no solution? Are we just going to wait for a big crash and buy gold and silver to avoid it? Is it unavoidable? Is there something a government can do
I think the clear policy response would be to raise interest rates to a normal level, and we saw this working in the U.S. under Paul Volcker. The stagflation of the 70s, he raised interest rates to 14%. Interest rates in this country are 1.5%, 2%. Imagine if rates went to 14%. Clearly, there would be an enormous recession/depression. However, it was needed to get rid of the rot in the system. If you're going to have a monetary system, monetary policy, and you're going to have a free market capital system as it's designed and modeled in this country the way it is, and you have to use the interest rate lever the way it was designed. Gordon Brown talked about this idea of no more boom and bust. Well, that's not capitalism. Capitalism has booms and busts. The busts weed out the weak players. The booms then follow. That's the way it is in many times in nature. That's the way it is in business. That's the way it is in capitalism. The idea of trying for the government to step in and eliminate the boom and bust cycle is an invitation to arrive where we are today. Okay, so raise interest rates. Now they're not going to raise interest rates, and the fact is that the global debt bubble, if you include the derivative market, which is an extension of the debt bubble, is $600 trillion. The total GDP of the world is $55 trillion. So you have 10 times more debt than you have global GDP. So you can't, I hate to put it into crude terms, but you fit 10 pounds of shit into a 1 pound bucket. And that's what these politicians are having us believe. It's not going to happen. Something's got to give, and it's happening now.
Wow.
This country, I think, is the point I'd like to make, is uniquely vulnerable for the primary reason that it doesn't hold enough gold, and that's going to be a big factor going forward. Secondarily, the government doesn't seem to really have a grasp of the geopolitical narrative that's unfolding with Europe. I don't think Germany has any question in their mind that they have a way now to create a fiscal union, to run that. If you're going to create a fiscal union in the Eurozone, that's now $30-40 trillion of new bonds that have to be traded. That's not going to happen in the city of London. They're going to be priced in euros, and it's going to happen in Frankfurt. So that's not. So the UK is giving away. I think the city is corrupt, but it does generate some GDP. But that's not going to be generating any GDP anymore because there's going to be a pariah island off the coast of France, that people used to go to watch the Olympics. But other than that, there's not going to be much going on.
Yes, sir, in the green, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Matt. So I was having quite a good day. Until about half an hour. What can people do to bring pressure on the government to put this right? Because it's quite alarming what I'm hearing. I mean, what can people do about it?
Well, just before he answers, there's nearly 100 people in this hall, and there's another 250 turned away. Every member of Parliament was written to 3 times. Twice or 3 times, Rob. Every member of Parliament was written to twice, inviting them to this meeting. Are there any members of Parliament present in the meeting? Declare now or forever hold your peace. That's the level of illiteracy, ignorance, complacency, complicity. Here they had a chance to listen and learn from somebody who knows more than they do about the workings of the economic system they support. Not one of them came. Not one of them came to the meeting. Go ahead.
What was the question?
What could people do to bring this, obvious problem?
Well, I think, yeah, okay. I think that, as I was a moment ago, I think that I really must give kudos to groups like UK Uncut and other groups. I think they're doing a really good job. I think they've got some smart strategies now. The Occupy movement, it lacked focus, and it really had no agenda. It was just a rallying cry. But this idea of the debt jubilee, or strike the debt, then that makes sense. Occupy Wall Street, strike the debt. There's a part of that phrase now that makes sense. So there's going to be a lot more activity there, and eventually, politicians are going to go with the flow. Then one of these politicians is going to figure out that they have a bright future by backing this constituency, and they will rise up the ranks. And the political process is what I would have to call a lagging indicator, to put it into economic terms. The politicians are never going to lead on these issues. They will respond. They will react. I lay out my case, and you've heard my case. Is this going to happen as I've described it? It could. But perhaps, I'm not an oracle, even though I had a show called The Oracle on BBC World News. I don't like to talk so much about the bright side of things, because that tends to lull people into complacency. There are some good things, but I'm not going to focus a lot on it, because I don't want you to think that there's a corner's being turned anytime soon on this. This is a dire situation that needs your full attention. Isaac Newton, he was running the economy here in this country. He brought the gold standard. Why? Because it made frickin' sense. Now you have, since for the last 30 years, you have alchemy, turning paper into fake GDP nonsense. And that bubble is popping. And where we're going to go? We're going back to where we've been for the 5,000 years, gold and silver.
Wow. Let me look around. Yes, madam.
That's right,
I don't like the idea of interest rates going up. I find it very scary.
To contrast it with the 70s and to contrast it with the interest rates, in the 70s versus today, it's a slightly different situation, because you have, for the first time, really since the 70s or at any time, you have governments that have decided amongst themselves to create this global network through the G20 nations, through the central banks, of this enormous bond-backed financial, it just came out today that the shadow economy, as they call it, is $67 trillion. It's $6 trillion more than they thought 2 weeks ago. $67 trillion in this shadow economy. This is all financed by interest rates at 0%.
How?
Because the cost of borrowing to go speculate on a bond future is close to nothing, because interest rates are low. And that's what Osborne and Mervyn King, that's their constituency. Those guys they want interest rates at 0 because they want the lowest possible borrowing cost to go speculate. Okay, now when the speculation goes bad, as they did with AIG, or they do with these other banks, then they come to the people and say, you bail us out. Then the government writes them a check for billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of pounds, and then turns around and says, we now have $500 billion liability. We need to impose austerity. So interest rates, yes, when they're high, they have the effect of causing duress, as you described it. However, it also weeds out all the banking speculators who are getting a free ride on this economy. Now, think of it this way. I mean, if you have, certain parasites in your body, et cetera, you may take something that makes you sick, but you're willing to get that sick to get rid of that parasite, because that parasite's got to leave your body. And that's what interest rates can do. It can get rid of the, what I call the financial terrorists. I mean, we can talk about that term. I mean, it's a bit of hyperbole perhaps, but there's an element in this economy, on the City of London, around the world, of bankers. Let me give you another example of how this has become an insidious, overwhelmingly destructive force. When the economy of Greece was deteriorating and falling apart, we now know from the records that banks like Citibank were sending emails back and forth to the press to circulate rumors to get the bond market to crash, because they were selling those bonds short. They were making negative bets. So there's a country, an entire country, that's being tossed around in traders in New York and the City of London like a football to make an easy buck. Okay? In LIBOR scandal, $100 trillion scandal, is interest rate related. The interest rates, there's a small differential between 2.5%, 2.75%. These banks are buying and selling simultaneously to capture that tiny spread. It doesn't sound like a lot of money, but if you spread it out over $100 trillion, it is a lot of money. And they can do that because their cost of borrowing is near zero. If your cost of borrowing was near zero, and every time you made a mistake, you got bailed out, you could be rich too. You could be, well, not rich, but you could be a big, player in this environment too. My goal is not this rich-poor dichotomy. I'm saying there's huge injustice, and this supposed democracy is hungry for justice. And economically, we have an injustice that expresses itself in this somewhat arcane world of interest rates. But it's no less an injustice than a man wrongly accused on a show trial who ends up going to jail for life for a political purpose. That's an injustice we can recognize. 0% interest rates are an injustice we cannot recognize, but we should recognize for what it is, a gross misjustice perpetrated by the politicians in cahoots with the bankers, in cahoots with the central bankers, in cahoots with the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central banker of central bankers. Yes, higher interest rates will be painful, but we need to take that medicine to get rid of these parasites.
But don't you think the bankers would get richer on the higher interest?
Of course, you're going to have the market is going. There's always going to be players on the margin, gaming the system, working the markets, making money. That's not actually, parasites in a small quantity are not a bad thing. Your gut is full of parasites right now. If you took them out of your gut, you'd be unhealthy. So having a few banker parasites like an Osborne around, it's not necessarily the worst thing. But you don't want the parasites running the entire show. Yes, there'll be some profiteering on the margins, but the system as a whole has to be preserved. You can make the comparison with the economy with the ecology. Two words that seem to go together really well. The ecology of the financial world is being destroyed with risk that's spilling out of the Exxon Valdez, called Goldman Sachs, called Barclays, called Lloyd's. It's like a tanker up there in the Puget Sound, Alaska, spewing tons and gallons and barrels and millions of barrels of toxic risk that is the byproduct of their immoral, unjust activities, playing the game on LIBOR and other areas. It's an environmental catastrophe. Again, it's not hard to rhetorically build a case to go after these guys, but nobody in politics is doing it because they are supported by these guys. In America, they almost elected a private equity CEO in Mitt Romney. What insanity is that? The biggest growth industry in America is the prison business. What are they talking about here in this country? Privatizing the prisons? That's the last thing you want. Because in America they privatized the prisons, and they did the Corrections Corps of America. You can look it up. Biggest private prison operator in America. They cut a deal with 48 states. They'll run the prisons if the state guarantees 98% occupancy. Okay?
Let's take some more. Let's take some more. Gentlemen.
Let me just talk about money being created first. And the common perception is that a bank takes a deposit, let's say $100. They then keep $10 in reserve and they lend out $90. This is the common perception. It's the fractional reserve banking model. This is what people believe is the case. In fact, it's not really the case. The case is that if somebody like Guy Hands, who's a private equity guy, goes to a bank on Wall Street or the City of London, and he needs $1 billion to buy something, the bank loans him $1 billion. It has no collateral value whatsoever. The bank has no reserves against that $1 billion. The bank has no deposits against that $1 billion. They simply make a loan to him of $1 billion. He then buys that company, and then that $1 billion is included in the economy as $1 billion. So it was created by the bank, effectively, out of thin air. Since the deregulation era of the Reagan-Thatcher years, we have this period of what are known as leveraged buyouts, made famous in this country by people like Sir Jimmy Goldsmith and around the world, where they convince bankers to lend them money against assets that they don't own, but they're going to acquire with the money that they borrow. I was working on Wall Street in the 80s during the period of Michael Milken and the rise of Drexel Burnham Lambert and the leveraged buyout, and it created this enormous thing called the stock market bubble, which crashed in 1987, which was the first global shock crash of the modern era, which I was working on Wall Street at the time. I had a front row seat, can tell you all about it. But instead of passing rules and regulations to stop that from happening again, what was done is that they deregulated more so that the banks could take on more debt. The mantra at the time was that it wasn't that the banks were taking irresponsible risk. The mantra at the time was that they didn't have enough quantitative analysis of risk for them to manage the risk. We need better mathematics, better quantitative analysis, so that you can take on more risk and do bigger deals. And that trend's been with us for 30 years. We had the biggest deals in history, getting progressively more each year. In Seoul, and I would posit this, Greece was a leveraged buyout. John Paulson, a hedge fund manager in Wall Street, had a meeting with the leaders of Greece discussing about the crash in Greece before it happened and how to profit on the crash. The same way they profited on the subprime crash, which was another engineered crash, to make money on the downside. And the response is always to make it easier to borrow more. That's why we have $600 trillion in derivatives. It's all part of this expanding. And that's why bond market's at 250-year highs. That's why the bond market's the biggest bubble in history. It's going to make the tulip bulb bubble pale by comparison when it busts. And when it busts, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to have your socks rocked. We're talking about entire countries going belly up. And I believe including this one, because they have way too much debt, hardly any gold, and the leadership is out to lunch. But the question of does Britain have resources, and is gold the only resource to have? Yes, of course, Britain has resources, but I'll give you a little story. Argentina is back in the news because the debt deal they did 10 years ago was being questioned by a few holdouts, a few vulture capitalists and hedge funds who wouldn't accept the 30 cents on the dollar. They wanted 100 cents on the dollar. So they put that whole deal back into play. And a hedge fund in New York took it upon themselves to find a naval ship of the Argentinian armed forces that was docked outside of Argentina, and they seized the ship. The hedge fund operator, a private hedge fund, seized a naval ship from a government to satisfy debts that they claimed they were owed. So, sure, Britain's got assets. Sure they do. Yeah, but are they going to be able... But this is becoming an interesting conflict. To make the long story short, I don't think the assets are not going to cover the debt. It has assets, but inadequate to cover the debt. So I would pay up the 0.5% on my mortgage to freeze my mortgage rate instead of exposing myself to a 3 to 4% rise suddenly, and then a loss of that house.
But isn't that a peculiarly British problem? Our preoccupation with house ownership, as opposed to other countries like France, where the proportion of house ownership is much less, the proportion of rented accommodation much higher. And why should I bought my house for £220,000. It's now worth £1.5 million. Why? Is that a better house? It's exactly the same house. Why should it be worth so many more times?
Okay, well, let me jump in here. So,
isn't there a concept question here that we need to deal with? Why should wealth be generated merely by sitting in your own house?
Second of all, the house price, due to the falling rate environment, as George Galloway just described, the value of your house increases. And a lot of people in this country, they use the increase in that value to extract money. They borrowed against that increased value. So their percentage of the mortgage to the equity in the house always was high because they kept taking money out as the asset prices went up. When there was a housing correction, then you found that suddenly the mortgage was worth more than the equity in the house. You're underwater. That was the housing crisis, you could say, and it's still going on outside everywhere in this country except for London, which has a very unique appeal to wealthy people. So there you see the dynamics of what happens when you have a balance sheet with an asset that's prices being fueled by lower interest rates that you then use as collateral to borrow more money. And there you see that loop. It's what the gentleman in back was describing also. There's a positive feedback loop. Where rising values due to higher prices create rising values. That's a bubble. That's a bubble. That's the tulip bulb bubble. That's the South Sea bubble. That's the Mississippi Company. You're using the asset to fund more leverage, more consumption, until you reach a point where you cannot grow anymore and you have a crash. You saw it in housing. You understand why it happened in housing. Because people took out against their house. I see people are nodding their head. That you understand. What I'm saying today is that the world banking system has done the exact same thing with sovereign bonds. We're in a massive bubble. We're in a dangerously high bubble, in my opinion. And again, I could be wrong, but this is what I see, and it looks bad. And this year, a group here in the UK is doing another silver coin, and they were at the mint here in the UK, but they've had to change mints. They're now using a different mint, so it's taking longer than they thought. The interest is very high. Again, I lend them my image and my name as a way to get silver in people's hands.
Now listen, we have to go because the police need to lock up, and it's 2 minutes before 9 o'clock. A lot of TV companies pay Max a lot of money for what he just did for us for free. So the first thing to do is thank Max Keiser. So I hope you'll stay in touch with us by the various means that are available to us. That's respectparty.org on the internet, or you can follow me at George Galloway MP on Facebook, or at George Galloway on Twitter. Thank you all for coming, and if you see anybody that didn't get in, please personally convey my apologies about that. There aren't many bigger rooms available in Parliament than this that allow filming and photography and the public in. There is in fact one other, but it was already booked by someone else. But definitely if we get a speaker of the eminence of Max Keiser, we'll book the biggest room that we can. May you all go in peace. Thank you very much indeed. Peacefully now, no revolution. Oh, yeah.